Mr. Pine's Purple House. Story and pictures by Leonard Kessler. Mr. Pine lived on Vine Street in a little white house. "A white house is fine," said Mr. Pine, "but there are 50 white houses all in a line on Vine Street. How can I tell which one is mine?" He looked up and down the street. "I know," said Mr. Pine. "I will plant a tree, a little pine tree, by my house. Pine tree, pine's house, see? That's me." "That's what I will do," he said, and that is what he did. Mr. Gold lived next door to Mr. Pine.
"What a nice little tree,"
said Mr. Gold. Miss Green lived next door to Mr. Gold. "Oh, what a pretty tree," said Mrs. Green. Mrs. Brown lived next door to Mrs. Green.
"What a very nice tree,"
said Mrs. Brown. The next day, Mr. Pine looked out of his window. He wanted to see his little pine tree. But what did he see? He saw 50 white houses all in a line, and there was a little pine tree by each one. "Oh, no!" said Mr. Pine. "Now how can I tell which house is mine?" He looked up and down the street again. "I know," said Mr. Pine. "I will plant a big bush next to the little pine tree." Big bush, pine tree, Pine's house, see? That's me. And he did. Then he did this and this. "There," said Mr. Pine. "That looks just fine."
"What a pretty bush,"
said Mr. Gold. "Oh, nice," said Mrs. Green.
"Very, very pretty,"
said Mrs. Brown. The next morning, Mr. Pine looked out his window. He wanted to see his big bush by his little pine tree. But what did he see? There were 50 white houses all in a line. There were 50 little green trees, all of them pine. And next to each tree, there was a big bush. "Oh, no," said Mr. Pine. "Oh, no!" All the houses still looked the same. Mr. Pine thought and thought. "I know," said Mr. Pine. "I will paint my house." He thought and thought some more. "Let me see," he said. "Red, yellow, orange, no, blue, green, pink. Let me see. I know, I will paint my house purple." Then off he went to get the paint. "I want to buy some paint," said Mr. Pine to Mr. Dash. "I want to paint my house purple." "Purple?" asked Mr. Dash. "Yes, purple," said Mr. Pine. "Green is very nice," said Mr. Dash. "No," said Mr. Pine. "Red is very nice," said Mr. Dash. "No," said Mr. Pine. "White is very, very nice." "No, no, no," said Mr. Pine. "I want purple paint." "Purple paint," said Mr. Dash. "Think of that. Well, for your house, you will need 9 big cans of purple paint." "I will need some brushes too," said Mr. Pine. On these, then I will need something to mix the paint and clean the brushes." Mr. Pine put everything into his truck. Back he went to Vine Street. He put his tall ladder here. He put his little ladder here. "I have things to do before I paint," said Mr. Pine. "Mix and fix. Fill this and sweep this. Mix, mix, mix. Now the paint is just right. Now I can paint." Then Mr. Pine went up the ladder to the very top of the house. he began to paint. Squish, squish, squish went the paintbrush. Squish, squish, squish. Some boys were playing ball in the street, but Mr. Pine did not see them. A boy hit the ball. Up went the ball. Up, up, up. It was a home run.
Look out, Mr. Pine! Look out!
The boys called, but Mr. Pine did not hear them. Pow! Down came the ball on Mr. Pine's hat. Pow! Down came the brushes. Down came the purple paint. Down came Mr. Pine. Now I have to get more paint, said Mr. Pine. He went up the ladder again. Squish, squish, squish went the paintbrush. Squish, squish, squish. Then Mr. Gold's cat ran under the ladder. Mr. Pine's dog ran after the little cat. Round and around they ran. Grr, meow, meow, grr, meow. The little cat ran up the ladder, but Mr. Pine did not see her. Mr. Pine came down the ladder, down on the little cat's foot.
Meow! Ow, 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 meow, meow.
Down came the cat, down came the brushes, down came the ladder, down came the paint, down came Mr. Pine. Pow! Now Mr. Pine had purple grass, a purple cat, a purple dog, a purple hat, and a purple nose. Now I have to get more purple paint, said Mr. Pine. Up the ladder he went again. Squish, squish. Mr. Pine painted and painted until the house was all purple. Everyone on Vine Street came to look at Mr. Pine's purple house. No one had seen a purple house before.
What a nice purple, said Mrs. Gray. I will paint my house.
What a pretty purple house,
said Mr. Gold.
I will paint my house.
What a very pretty purple house,
said Mrs. Green.
I will paint my house too.
No, said Mr. Pine. Not 50 purple houses all in a line all on Vine Street.
But I will paint my house pink,
said Mrs. Gray.
Yellow for me,
said Mrs. Green.
Green for me,
said Mrs. Brown.
Well, I like red,
said Mrs. White.
I'm going to keep my house all white,
said Mr. Gold. Now there are 50 houses on Vine Street. There are some red houses and green houses and brown houses. There are yellow and pink houses. There are some white houses too. But there is just one purple house on Vine Street. And that is Mr. Pine's purple house.